Hi, and welcome to this next lecture on supply chains. Today we're going to talk a bit about the delivery of products, goods, and services. In the previous lectures, we talked about how you can communicate with your customers. We've talked about developing products, goods, and services. We talked about different business models that you can use. But eventually you have to be able to deliver the products, the goods, and the services to the consumer. And this happens through what we call supply chains. So that is what we're going to take a look at today, supply chains. And we're going to talk a bit about two different types of supply chains. One is business to business, so companies delivering products and goods to other companies, and the business to consumer supply chain. So why do we talk about supply chain? Well, if you talk about supply chain management specifically, there's different tasks and the different things that you have to do to make sure that your products, goods, and services are delivered to the right person at the right time, at the right location. So that is the challenge of supply chain management, and you have to make sure that you deliver your products, goods, and services at the right time, the right location, to the right person, and it should be the right product. And to do that, you also want to be cost effective, of course, because often supply chains, logistics, they're a very cost intensive part of the operations. So you can do optimization of your supply chain by looking at where you can optimize certain elements. You can combine shipping, and you can develop different strategies that help you manage the supply chain. And we're going to take a look at some of these strategies later on. So all of that is part of that strategy of how you are delivering your products, goods, and services is part of your supply chain management strategy. And often within that strategy, there is a part of planning. So how do you plan the supply chains? How do you plan to deliver the products, goods, and services? Execution, so going from your plan to operations, and then the visibility and the analytics. So how do you make sure that tracking the performance of the supply chain, but also identifying where things can be improved. And especially in that latter part, information systems, data, and decision support systems play an important role. So first, let's talk a little bit about what is a supply chain. So supply chains is all the processes, all the resources, and everything that's needed to get the product to the eventual customer or your client. So it is everything to do that takes the raw materials, transform it into products and services, and deliver it to a customer. Now, some supply chains can be very short. If you talk about a farmer who sells directly to a visitor or a customer who's coming by the farm to buy local produce, that is a short supply chain. The farmer takes the products from the land and sells it direct to the customer. But often, supply chains are very complex. Different products are made of different components that come from different suppliers that, again, use components from other suppliers that come from different raw materials. So eventually this whole chain that goes from raw materials to a finished product that's delivered to the customer is the supply chain. And every single organization in that supply chain plays a role in ensuring that that product gets to where it needs to be. So the reason we see it as a supply chain is because there's links between the different organizations or the companies in the supply chain. One hands the product to the other. So the output of one is the input to the next, and so on. But as I said, that idea of a chain sort of implies that will be a singular line, a linear thing. In the reality, it's more a network. Because if you build a product, you will probably use materials from different suppliers. Imagine something like a phone. Different components go into a phone. So to bring all these components together, you probably need from different suppliers who are again using other suppliers as well. So the challenge is to manage to make sure that all these products, these materials are flowing consistently. There's no disruptions, that there is sufficient stock but not too much stock because it will increase the cost. with the ultimate goal that you deliver your products, as I said, the right product to the right customer at the right time. And that it is a complex network is something that you will see in the next video, actually, from FedEx, where they will show you what it takes to ship, in this case, a pie within 1 day to a customer.
Save the day with last-minute deliveries, which brings us back to our pie, which I picked up in the historic little town of Occoquan, Virginia, from a friendly little place called, well, you see the sign. Hi.
Hi.
John.
Avis, how are you?
Meet Mom, Avis Renshaw.
Then we move into cherries.
And as Avis showed me what was on offer, I explained that I had it in mind to send the pie to my friend and colleague Yunji Denise.
Good evening, I'm Yunji Denise.
One-time ABC News reporter, now happily anchoring the news at station KITV in Honolulu, Hawaii. Distance involved, roughly 6,000 miles. My deadline for getting the pie to her, 24 hours.
Have you sent pies to Hawaii before? And they get there in one piece?
Amazingly, but yes, they do.
Cranberry apple. That's what went into the FedEx box. For precious or fragile items, best to leave the packaging to the professionals.
Have a great day.
And our pie is out the door. First human link in the FedEx chain, the first of many.
I've placed the pies securely in one designated area of my truck.
For the next few hours, you see that purple line? That's our pie on its journey, headed for Memphis, Tennessee. Why Memphis? Well, look at this place. It is FedEx's global super hub, which at more than 800 acres feels more like a military base than a shipping facility. And with Christmas approaching, it's a military base that's gearing up for battle.
It's what we prepare for. It's our Super Bowl. So
This is your Super Bowl.
This is our Super Bowl.
Marcus Martinez keeps the planes running on time, and the vans and the trucks, and 42 miles of conveyor belts. Every FedEx package is sent first to a hub like this before going on its journey.
How big a surge comes in the holiday season?
Here in Memphis, we'll go from about 1.5 million a night to a little between 1.9 and 2.1 million a night.
FedEx 1563, pushback approved, 18 right.
Let's check in on our pie, which they were kind enough to track just for us. It's coming in for a landing soon, so out onto the tarmac, where it's non-stop on the runways.
Okay, so these are now all incoming still.
Exactly. We're going to bring in about 155 jet aircraft tonight.
Tonight alone.
Tonight alone.
How busy does this place get compared to other airports?
Well, after dark, it's actually the busiest airport in the world.
Come on, y'all, bring it out!
In fact, most of the work here happens after midnight. Timing is everything. Back in the command center and on screens all over, a clock is counting down the deadline for getting all the packages in and out again. And then our pie is now safely on the ground, thanks to these two members of the Nightline Pie Delivery Team.
Thanks to fine landing by my first officer here, the pie made it in one piece.
Normally the pie would be in one of these shipping containers.
So where's our pie?
We have your pie right here.
But for now, it's being carried so that we can track it through our next stop. They call this the Matrix.
If you stand here for 15 minutes, you will see the world's economy pass before your eyes.
It's a whole building functioning as a sorting machine. The incoming packages slide in here.
You will see major tech shipments, you will see medical shipments.
And a pie.
And a pie.
Into the Matrix goes our box with the pie inside, courtesy of Lawrence Wick.
The package never stopped coming, so I got to get back to start sorting, okay?
And the box, well, once it drops out of sight into some hidden place of chutes and conveyor belts and scanners, it gets steered by belt to another building. 10 minutes later, it comes down a chute and gets picked up and put into a container.
Off to Honolulu.
And then it's out to the runway and takeoff. And 6 hours later, landing in Hawaii. Our last driver to deliver.
I hope this is something that you're waiting for.
I hope it's something good.
Ooh.
And
so you see here that in this video, there's a lot of different people involved. You will have seen there is, there is technology involved for tracking the package using barcodes and RFID chips. There is, logistics involved, specifically transportation, cars, planes, but there's a lot of people involved as well. So to make the supply chain work, all these elements that we've talked before in the other lectures, people, organization, processes, technology, and the information all needs to work together to make sure that we can track things and supply them. And especially now, since we rely more and more on package delivery in these times, because we go less to the shop, this pressure on the supply chain is increasing. So there is, when it comes to shipping and packages, there's a lot of developments and innovations going on in that field. So let's talk a little bit about some other aspects. That what you saw in this video obviously is a supply chain that works very well, but it doesn't always work well. There are problems with supply chains, especially if you think about that these supply chains are becoming bigger, more connected, things are moving faster with less margin for error. So when something happens, it has a ripple effect. And one example of that is the bullwhip effect. We'll show you that in a minute. But there can also be external events. Think about the corona outbreak or climate change, natural disasters that disrupt airports or air travel that will also disrupt the supply chain. And something else that is increasingly people being aware of is the corporate social responsibility. You saw there's a lot of trucks, a lot of planes involved in getting packages, moving them around the world. And there's an increasing pressure to reduce the carbon footprint of such supply chains. So either by shopping locally or by being more efficient or less emissions. So that corporate social responsibility on what we call green supply chains is increasing as well. So all the while that is happening, also customers, at the same time that they're critical on moving things, they're also critical on the products, which means there is also a reverse supply chain happening. Products get pulled back because of the quality that's not sufficient, or people send packages back because they don't like the products, they don't fit, or some other things. Those recalls or the packages have been sent back are as elements of a supply chain that that's actually the package that has been delivered was unnecessary because it has been sent back. So that makes 2 trips for that package essentially unnecessary, which incurs cost but also increases emissions. So a key thing is to reduce the number of returns, retouren in Dutch, of products, because if you can reduce the number of returns, it saves not only for you to ship but also to handle incoming products and that coming back. So let's talk a little bit about these disruptions of things that can go wrong in supply chains. So first, supply chains are now globally, which means products are getting moved between countries, between continents, and fly halfway across the globe. You see there's a lot of products that we're purchasing from China. So those products that are being shipped worldwide also expose the supply chain to a lot more elements. If you're flying across the globe, there's a higher chance that somewhere along the line you will have to deal with the disruption, and that disruption, that can be a natural disaster. So for example, type monsoons, they disrupt the ability to transport things off cargo, or people can't off the airport, or people can't get to work. So when an airport is out, for example, any supply chain that depends on that airport to either ship out or send out cargo, receive cargo, will be disrupted. And you will have a cascading effect because subsequently every other part of the supply chain or the network that depends on those goods will also be shut down. So you get a ripple effect through the supply chain. From one element that fails, everything else will have effects. So the other element that drives the fragility, as we call it, the breekbaarheid of a supply chain, is that we are reducing, because we're doing just-in-time delivery, we're reducing inventory, we're reducing costs, which means there is very little buffer to deal with disruptions. So those factors combined we have more dependency, we have more complex supply chains, we have less buffer in the supply chains. They make them very vulnerable and fragile to things like disruptions such as natural disasters. One other effect that is often mentioned is supply chains. In supply chains is bullwhip effects. So what is the bullwhip effect? So assume that this is a curve that shows what the customer is buying. This is the actual consumer. This is the actual purchases a consumer is doing. Now, the retailer, of course, has a supply. So he's purchasing, at a certain point, he's purchasing the products that the customer is buying. And the supply will drop because people are buying it, and he will order again. So although the demand is steady, somebody who's a retailer or has a store will order at certain intervals. So that supplier that provides the products to the store, let's say a distribution center or some warehouse, will see these curves, and they will also need to anticipate that there will be orders. So they will also make sure there is sufficient stock to fulfill the orders. So in the beginning, the orders, the inventory drops, and because there is an order, so they start producing more. So what does the manufacturer do? As soon as they see the inventories drop, they're going to produce more. And once they have produced enough, they're going to stop producing until the inventory of the distributor, until the supply of the inventory of the distributor drops again, and they're going to produce more. So you will see this curve of the manufacturer has a lot steeper and a lot more variance, much higher amplitude than the original curve. So the planning then in the manufacturing actually has a large swing. So if you strip out and you actually project the original consumer demand against what the manufacturing is planning for, you see a big difference. So this is what management gets. Because there is a demand, because we don't understand the demand well enough, you get these big swings in production. So this is what management wants, and this is what management gets. So that's, in short, is a little bit of the supply chain. So with the supply chain, this is the example of the bullwhip effect. So what happens with the bullwhip effect is that a small change in consumer demand that cannot be explained well enough will result in bigger and bigger effects if you go back down the supply chain. Probably what you will see now in Corona is that there is a sudden spike in the number of personal protection items, such as face masks, or medical items such as ventilators. There's a sharp increase, which means that all the manufacturing are now rapidly going to produce these things because there is a sharp demand. However, after a certain while, all these ventilators have been distributed, the outbreak is more or less under control, so the demand dies down, but the production is still going. Because of the time delay between the signal, the production, and the eventual delivery of the items, in a few months from now, we're going to have toilet paper, mouth masks, ventilators in large quantities and large supplies. So the bullwhip effect are these small triggers that have a sort of effect down the supply chain, where at the end, like a bullwhip, you hear a clack where it hits. And that effect causes for a lot of manufacturers a lot of headaches, a lot of costs, because you're overproducing, because you don't understand well enough the development of consumer demand. So understanding the consumer demand, exchanging information between the partners so they better understand if this is a one-time fluke or if this is a consistent change, helps the manufacturers at the start of the supply chain to anticipate and not over or underproduce. So exchanging information helps to make that difference between this widely curve, because you have all these other partners in between who are disrupting the information. The better the manufacturer will understand the consumer demand, the flatter that curve can be, because they can produce much more accurately. So a lot of that e-commerce we talked about before, and thus supply chain is in business to business. You saw in that previous diagram, there is a consumer, there is a manufacturing, but there's a lot of companies in between. So all these companies in the supply chain are doing business to business until the final retailer does the business to consumer version. So actually a large portion of supply chains and in e-commerce is business to business. And exchanging information between the partners in such a supply chain is tricky because it's of course information that is it tells you about your profit, your production capacity, and so on. So there's a lot of what we call proprietary information in it. So how do you exchange information in a supply chain? If you're dealing with competitors, if you want to exchange information because it makes the supply chain more stable, but you also have to keep in mind there's some secure information in it that you can't just publish. So what has been developed for that is electronic data interchanges. So that existed long before the internet, but these are places online where companies can exchange information in a secure way. So nowadays that happens via the internet, but there's a lot of different places that companies can work together to not give them all the information, but the relevant information precisely to those who need it. So that could be extranets, portals, and marketplaces. There's a lot of different ways you can think about portals, but if you talk about it like you have customer portals, think about a web shop where you log in. Sometimes you can see the inventory, you can decide if you want to order or not. On the other side of the scale, you have supplier portals. So those are where suppliers offer their products. So the customer portal is really aimed for you to see what you want to order, what you want as a customer, tailored to a customer. The supplier portal is the opposite. It's aimed at those who want to supply the products, to offer the products there. And in between are marketplaces for business to business, where suppliers, customers will meet. So a supplier, a customer in a business to business marketplace. Essentially the same way eBay works or Marktplaats works for consumers. A business to business marketplace is used to match suppliers and customers together and allow them to create a match, but also exchange information. So these marketplaces, they link together suppliers and customers, but also make it easier for smaller businesses to enter the market. You might know AliExpress, but before AliExpress, which is really aimed at the consumers, is Alibaba, which is aimed at business to business. And it's a website where even small companies can start offering their products or can start ordering products from other suppliers. So often Alibaba is a very broad marketplace, but there's also specialized marketplace which are really focused on a niche, for example, car parts or computer manufacturing or electronic manufacturing. And those are really tailored to one specific industry. Okay, so let's take a look next. Now we talked about what are supply chains, what are the challenges in managing them. So let's take a look at how you can manage such complex networks.